Everyone loves the rumble of a good old-fashioned V8. Even if you say you like your high-revving European engines, deep down, everyone loves a thumping great American V8. But that great V8 had to start somewhere, and that somewhere was the Ford Model 18, aka the 32 Coupe. The Model A was the follow-up to the iconic Model T. Now, creating a sequel to the most important car in history wasn't easy, but Ford managed to make another smash hit. That was very short-lived because after just 3 years, it was replaced, since Chevrolet had a new weapon, the most powerful mass-production car on sale. The Stove-Bolt Inline-6 was launched in 1929 with the Series AA Capital and blew everyone away. It was a 3.2-liter six-cylinder with overhead camshafts, a balanced crankshaft, and cast-iron pistons to make 60 horsepower and 130 torque by 1932, all for just $100 more than the Model A. So Ford had to respond with something even better. Now, there are 3 ways to increase horsepower. Forced induction, which was too expensive, bigger cylinders, which didn't work well for daily driving, or more cylinders. Now, that had been done on road cars for a while by this point. Cadillac had V16s, but it was also a Cadillac, and therefore way too expensive for this discussion. But an 8-cylinder engine, now that was an option. Usually, 8 cylinders took the form of inline-8s if you were from Buick, Packard, or Studebaker, but Ford wanted to try something different. They had been experimenting with 8-cylinder engines as far back as 1920 with the X8 prototypes. These were essentially plain engines that had significant cooling issues and were all around kinda hopeless. But with the Chevy Inline-6 dominating the showrooms, Ford had to act and took, surprisingly, inspiration from the French. Léon Levasseur designed the 8-cylinder Antoinette engine in 1905, and Antoniette? I don't know. It was made in 1905, and it's the most important engine you've never heard of, because it was the first ever V8 engine, and its V shape helped it stay compact while producing 50 horsepower in 1905. So it only weighed 190 pounds, a power-to-weight record that stood for 25 years. But like the Cadillacs, these were way too expensive for the average person, and that was kind of Ford's whole business model. So everyone else, including his own son Edsel, wanted an inline-6, but Henry Ford was a stubborn, difficult person. I won't really go into detail because otherwise YouTube will give me another strike, but he was very stubborn, he was very devoted, and he wasn't a very nice person. All I'm going to say is that he really liked the book Mein Kampf and wrote a book review about it in his newspaper. So yeah, you can say what you will about all of that mess that we're not really going to get more into, but that level of stubbornness made him completely ignore every single person around him and fund not 1 but 4 different V8 engine designs. Each of them were slightly different in their own special ways, but the secret to make the engine financially viable was the use of 3 main crankshaft bearings instead of 5. Then you mount the camshaft above the crankshaft for compactness, earning the Flathead name. Now, like the X8 from 1920, the Flathead had the same cooling issues since the exhaust ports were placed between the cylinders, and that shockingly scorched the block. So the Fords had a lot more coolant and a lot larger radiators than their rivals. And even then, the block still cracked due to the heat, and if the block didn't crack, the cylinder might just get ejected from the engine at any given time, since the car had a tendency to go through oil as fast as gasoline. But you know what? It didn't matter. The first mass-market V8 made 65 horsepower with the first ever muscle car rumble. People went nuts. Over 5 million were sold in 6 years, despite the high probability of the engine detonating. By the time the Y block replaced in 1948, over 10 million were produced, and licensed designs were still used by Simca trucks as late as 1990. It's one of those seminal automotive moments, the first V8 that anyone could have. Notice how I'm mainly talking about the car's engine and not the car itself, because the engine is an absolute game changer. The car, not so much. I mean, it's a great car, the Model 18, because it was made out of steel instead of wood to last longer, but compared to the Model T, the airflow was not a very big leap forward. Arguably the most important thing about the Model 18, apart from the V8, is that there was a lot of customization. By 1934, there were 14 different variants that you could order, all of which had either the 85 horsepower flathead or the 50 horsepower inline 4. Guess which one people chose. So, yeah, the Model 18, it was a great car, and the V8 is, again, one of the most important things in the history of the automotive industry, but it wasn't really that game-changing in terms of chassis design or aerodynamics or brakes or anything like that, which meant the real job for this car will only become clear a decade later. After World War II, GIs wanted to have some fun when they came home. They wanted some exhilaration, and the American auto industry was still very much in war mode spec. So they started scouring junkyards and found a whole lot of surprisingly intact Ford 32s, i.e., they found V8s for cheap in extremely lightweight frames, and if you get a Roadster or a Coupe, all the better. And what did they do? They started tuning them up and cutting them up to create their own custom cars. The 32 Coupe became a canvas to paint your entire personality on. Not only were they highly personalized, they were fast. And when a bunch of guys have a bunch of very fast cars, they like to race them, and drag racing exploded across America, and pop culture didn't slow it down, with the Beach Boys, Bruce Springsteen, and George Lucas writing the little Deuce Coupe into the cultural lexicon. So much so that there are as many Model 18 Coupes registered today as there were built in the original production run. With these continuation builds, their popularity hasn't decreased in the slightest. As late as 2004, hot rodders were tuning flatheads up to 700 horsepower and racing them at the Bonneville Salt Flats. And the current flathead class record stands at just over 302 miles an hour. But you don't need a Flathead V8 to have a custom 32. Pretty much any engine that's ever been built in history has been shoved into a Model 18. Obviously, Coyotes, Hemis, and LS swaps are as common as the sun rising in the east, but there have been a whole host of other weird stuff like Ferrari V8 swaps, 2 JZs, Vankel rotaries, and everything else in between. The only limit is your creativity and the sky above you.